This episode of Buy Black Podcast is brought to you by Haptic Consulting. Haptic Consulting specializes in maximizing the value your organization gets from its training budget by focusing on business needs, eliminating unnecessary training development, and helping you build a culture of engagement from the executive level down. Visit www.hapticconsulting.com to learn how I can help you develop better leaders, happier employees, and a more profitable company culture. Or you can email me at gerald@hapticconsulting.com. That's GERALD@hapticconsulting.com. Now let's get into the show.
Earlier this year, not too long after I got let go from the credit union, I decided to change the name of the podcast from I Really Mean It to the Minding Your Business podcast. The reason or rationale behind the change was as my audience started to pick up, they didn't know really what the hell I really mean it. What did I really mean? Right? So the title of it was ambiguous to some folks that unless you had to listen to it to know what it was about. And from a marketing standpoint, and just sharing this with your audience, you want your show, you want to have a creative, kind of catchy, if that's the route that you want to go, but you want to be fairly overt in your titling so that before people even listen to your podcast, they can get a sense of what it's about.
Buy Black Podcast, episode 36, How Podcasting Can Help You Market and Grow Your Business with Ron Brooks. Welcome to Buy Black, the only podcast dedicated to helping you find, connect with, and support Black-owned businesses. We're on a mission to bring consumers and business owners together to ignite the global Black economy. I'm your host, Gerald Jones, and if you're a Black business owner or a socially conscious consumer, you've joined the right community. Ready? Let's get to work. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for another great episode of Buy Black, your only podcast dedicated to helping you find and connect with Black-owned businesses. Today, we're going to connect with a good friend of mine. His name is Mr. Ron Brooks. Ron is the host of the Minding Your Business podcast. You can find a link to his show down in the show notes. And today, Ron is going to be talking to us about how you can use a podcast in order to help you market your business. So if you're out there in the world and you have whether it be a consulting business or if you have a specific niche business where you are an expert and you want to connect with people and bring an audience to you and present yourself to them as an expert in that field to help grow your client base, to help grow your business, Ron is going to talk to us about all the benefits of doing that and just how easy it is to get set up. So before we jump into that interview, just a couple of quick notes about our reviews. We're up to 23 total reviews on the Apple app for your iPhone and iPad. We are up to 13 total reviews over on the Android app. That's to include one new 5-star review from DL Lamar. DL Lamar says, I have been listening to this podcast using the Player FM app, where I came across it a couple of months ago searching anything Black. I love this podcast because the topics are varied and hit on so many levels for Black people, and it's more than its entrepreneurial focus. I got the app when I heard a mention of it, so now I can use it and easily share with others. Keep up the good work. Do for self. Hey, DL, thanks for being out there. Thanks for jumping in and give us that review. And I do realize that, a lot of you listening right now, you are still listening out, whether it be on Player FM or Radio Public or Stitcher or any other locations. I mean, this show is available on probably 30 or 40 different directories. But I highly encourage you, wherever you happen to be listening, if you haven't downloaded the Apple app or the Android app, depending on the device that you listen on, I highly recommend doing that. It just makes it so simple to, like DL said, to get to the content and to share the content with other people. They don't have to go searching through a podcast directory. You just tell them to go to their app store, look up Buy Black, and they will find the podcast. And it just makes life so much easier. And as always, guys, right there from the app, in the contact tab, you can email me, you can call me. It's the easiest way to get connected and stay connected with the show. Other than that, I'm not going to take up too much of your time. We're going to jump right into this interview with Ron. He gives us a lot of great insight, not only about starting a podcast to market your business, but also about moving from a role as an employeepreneur who's basically got a side hustle to being a full-time entrepreneur and business owner. So if you are out there and you are headed on that path, this is definitely going to be a great episode for you. So let's jump into it. Hey guys, welcome back to Buy Black, your only podcast dedicated to helping you find and connect with Black-owned businesses. Today, we are recording episode 36. That is episode 36 of the Buy Black podcast. And I have an excellent guest with me today. His name is Ron Brooks. He is a co-founder of Brooks Brothers Consulting, which is a business and leadership development firm that focuses on executive, director, and manager leadership talent coaching. But you know what? I did not come to know Ron through his consulting firm. He is also the host of the Minding Your Business podcast, of which I was graciously invited to come join him for the Black Panther Special Edition episode a few weeks ago. And today we're going to be learning a little bit from Ron about how to get a podcast started, how to transition from being an employee to being an entrepreneur, how to market your business, all kinds of experience that this man has out here in the world. And I'm excited to have him here. Hey, Ron, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Gerald, thank you so much. And definitely shout out to you and to your fantastic audience. I'm so elated for the opportunity to be here and speaking with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a great episode. I can already tell, man. So, I normally like to run my mouth and waste a bunch of time, but we're not going to do that because you got all the fire to bring today. So I'm really just going to jump right into it, hand it to you. Ron, if you tell us a little bit about your background, let the folks get to know you, and we'll get rolling.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Well, I was actually born in the Chicago Heights area of Chicago, Illinois, back early 80s. My dad was a contract engineer with the old Chicago Bridge and Iron Company. That allowed him, from a contractual standpoint, to move some around the country. So I lived a little bit of time in Grand Forks, North Dakota, all the way down to Birmingham, Alabama, and got a chance to really kind of settle here in my youth in Memphis, Tennessee. So Memphis is kind of more my adopted home. I've lived here, grew up here, met my wife here, and currently raising my family here. And, my background really kind of started in athletics, where I was a four-year letterman in basketball and football in high school. Lived in the community of Orange Mound, which is a neighborhood kind of southeast within Memphis, which is heralded as the oldest Black community in the country, the oldest next to Harlem within New York City. And so a lot of heritage and a lot of pride that I come from. But, Gerald, with athletics really kind of, taught me, as most people that I'll tell you that are kind of reared in athletics, it teaches you teamwork, teaches you how to win, teaches you how to lose, teaches you how to be stand up and how to fight through adversity and all those different things that are common within athletics. And so able to do that, did that at the high school level, did it at 1 year at the college level, had a chance to go down with a colleague of mine who's actually now works in cybersecurity in D.C., but at that time we were kind of young knuckleheads and went down to the NBA draft camp in 2000 down in Orlando, Florida, and also went back to Chicago for a draft camp. And didn't make the team. Of course, I maxed out my talent and was amazed at the NBA level talent, of course, that I was familiar with. And after getting cut my freshman year, I went to San Antonio, Texas for a couple of weeks with the San Antonio Spurs organization. Shout out to them. And what's funny is back then, of course, you get an agent, and of course, your agent always sends someone about your age, the kid, who's like their intern, to kind of run around with you. They paid me $25,000, and within those 2 weeks, I came back home, man. My mom was hot. I came back with $5,000.
Wow.
I spent a lot of time on the Riverwalk and running behind women and spending money down there and whatnot. So by the time I paid, taxes, and by the time I got through running around, I got cut naturally, and went back to Memphis. Most folks will keep in mind that this was the year after the Spurs had got dusted by the Lakers in the playoffs. They had won the championship in '99. The Lakers dusted them in 2000 with Shaq as the MVP. Kobe Bryant kind of emerged and all that. And so they were looking for backup point guard help, which was my position. And so that's where they were evaluating me to see if that was going to be the case. Get back to Memphis. Pride's hurt. John Calipari at that point had taken over the University of Memphis as head coach. He was bringing his horses in, of course, so I didn't really have a place. And I was hot about that, so I just dug into school. And graduated 2003. And actually the year before I graduated, Gerald, man, I started in banking. And I started with a bank there in Memphis, management training program, that kind of thing. So at graduation, I was prepared for a job, because I'd already been working, established relationships and the sort.
Mm-hmm.
So started in banking, rose pretty quick because I kind of got an understanding of the game, was an athlete, used to competing, and that sort of thing. So started managing my own branches, that kind of thing. And my first dive into entrepreneurship, and I really want your audience to grab this because there's a lot of people with this experience. A guy that was two bosses above me came to my branch one day, Gerald, man, and he was coming to see me. He's coming to see the branches we were doing well, and that kind of thing, and our performance and all that kind of thing. And so he left. He actually left a piece of paper on my desk. This changed my life, man. He left it, and it was turned over where the face was facing down. And I'm curious as to what the boss's boss would leave on my desk. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't mean to, by the way. So I flipped the paper over, and it's revenue per what they call FTE, full-time employee.
Uh-huh.
Revenue per full-time employee. So my name's at the top. So first thing, and again, I'm still fairly green. So I look at it, I'm like, well, wait a minute. My name being at the top could be good, or that could be bad, depending on the subject. And so, now I'm getting more curious. So my name's at the top. I had generated, this was through August of that year, so it wasn't even a full year. I led the West Tennessee area, which is Memphis and Jackson, Tennessee, and all that. I led in revenue per full-time employee with over $1.2 million that I had generated. What they were calculating was the cost of having me versus what I was producing led the area. At this time, you got to keep in mind, they're paying me about, close to about $30,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think by August, I haven't even made that full $30,000. Plus after Uncle Sam gets a hold of it, right?
Right.
So I've generated these folks $1.2 million. And I'm looking at my account and I'm like, well, wait, hold on a second. And, I started talking with some mentors and they were cracking up. It was like, okay, now you're seeing what we've been telling, that, this is, why people have employees and that kind of thing. It's like you're generating them a whole lot of money. Now, do you think that effort could go towards yourself? And I was like, what? I think you're kind of right. So I started dabbling into some real estate business on the side and kind of became, at that point, Gerald, a employeepreneur.
Okay.
So I'm working up, I continue to kind of work. I met my wife. We dated. We get married in 2007. I go into more of a business banking kind of role. I'm working with businesses and things like that. And continue to progress up, getting promoted, yada, yada, yada. Changed banks several times. Profile and salary is building, right? But I always kind of had, Gerald, that, entrepreneur side of me. And I'd always kind of be doing it on the side. And I always had pretty good autonomy in terms of my role and position. So I had flexibility to be out of the office and do all those kind of things, which allowed me to facilitate, kind of my side hustle or side business.
Right.
And, so in my last stop, I got kind of in the credit union world. I was working for one of the larger credit unions in West Tennessee, and I was at the executive level. And at this point, I had opened up a co-working facility downtown called Andre Memphis. and had some great joys with that, and had a couple epic fails with it in terms of how I was looking to manage that and work full time. And so something, occurred actually the first of this year. So this is kind of recent information that I haven't even had a chance to even share with too many people, but I want to share with you in the audience that, I was let go from the credit union, and completely unexpected. Now, Gerald, January 4th, the folks let me go, man.
This year?
We had this year.
Wow.
Now you think, okay, the fourth day of the year, right? I had gone through budget season. I had, done everything, and just to frame it for people, I was the executive over the branch area. So it was 10 branches and a 20-seat call center. So 95 employees I was responsible for. The company had about 170. So, roughly 2/3 of the employee count of the company rolled to me.
Wow.
Right? That I was responsible for hiring, onboarding, and engaging. So we had a, phenomenal year in 2017. And I'm doing my business. I've got that going. I've got directors rolling up to me. And, I never got comfortable with that whole Mr. Brooks thing. I'm constantly telling people, call me Ron. But, I had acquired this kind of persona because of my title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, what I learned really quick on January 4th, that afternoon, I was brought in and told, well, we're looking to move forward with something, and you're not going to be a part of that. Well, what's something? And that's where I was. So I'm given the severance, and I had to leave, right? And while that's difficult, that hard pill to swallow, because I've got 3 girls,
mm-hmm.
right? And so I got mouths to feed. The only butt that I wipe ain't just my own. You know what I mean? And so now, I'm kind of out there, and now I'm in my business full time for the first time, right? Which is exciting, but it's scary. And one of the things that I deal with the scary piece, Gerald, is the fear factor that comes with when you're accustomed to getting paid every other week. And now I've got to find a way to generate it, not just to make money to go hang out or go do this, but just to pay basic bills and keep food on the table. Because, my wife works and things like that. But, I'm sure your audience, the men can relate that, you want to be a contributor and a producer and a leader within your household. And there's many ways to do that, but one of your primary ways is to make sure you're leading the charge financially.
Mm-hmm.
And so now all of a sudden, for the first time, I'm not doing that, right? And I was at a position where, I was making good money. Now I'm making well 6-figure money. You know what I mean? And it was difficult. And so even right now today, man, I get into where I'm battling against the fear factor of, do I go back to work? Do I continue to build the business? And then how do I split that time? And each day that goes by, that becomes somewhat of more of a challenge. And so, what I do is I keep myself active, keep my skills sharp. I keep around positive people, keep around mentors. I listen to podcasts like your podcast and, other podcasts kind of around the country that deal in positivity and deal in edification and deal in knowledge. And, those are things that keep me motivated and keep me going, when I hit them rough patches of my biggest enemy, which is me, Ron Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
No white man has been my enemy. No, at least overtly to that extent. No, in other ways, yes. No other white woman, no black woman, nobody. The biggest enemy that we all face looks at us back in the mirror, because that's the toughest one, because no one's closer to you than you. Right? So it's difficult, man, but, I've had, a great run so far, man. I've got so far to go. And, man, I'm excited about things that are going on, not just for me, but, for many other people. When I see success, I pump my fist, man, because I love to see winning. And that's why I've always referred to myself as the champion. Champ Ron is what moniker I've always kind of gone by. And my dad nicknamed me that when I was really just a week old. And his story was, and I haven't had anybody confirm this. His story was he called me champ because Super Bowl 25, I believe, Oakland versus Philly, and I believe Oakland won the Super Bowl that year.
Mm-hmm.
He said that I stayed up and watched the whole Super Bowl at a week old.
Oh, wow.
He said I didn't even go to sleep. He said I sat there with him and watched it like I was a person. I'm a week old. Now, again, there's nobody there to confirm that.
We just gonna call it true.
But
we gonna call it true.
But that's his story, and he's sticking with it.
All right.
So I've always gone by that, and he always called me champ growing up. In fact, he just stopped doing it probably around the time, I was getting married and that kind of thing. But all the way up to that time, he always called me champ.
Yeah.
So that was always his thing. So he never called me Ron or Ronnie or anything like that. So I'm a junior. So, I live with that legacy. But man, I'm excited about what's going on, and my story, I hope will be able to help inspire some people in your audience that deal with that, because when you've got young children and you got your family, you got your household, and you're paying mortgages and you're doing all these things, and you're trying to figure out, man, I really want to do this, but I feel like I've got to do this because I've got to keep the lights on, and I've got to do that, and will I ever get to do something I really love? And man, it's just been a lot of faith with this, man, a lot of faith. And sometimes I think things happen, and I think this happened to allow me to go in an even bigger and better direction, even though it's got its fear factor and things like that to it, Gerald. I'm just a believer that not only just things happen for a reason, but the energy takes you to a place where you can be that much more influential and have that much bigger of an impact.
Right.
Even more so than being the vice president of retail at a bank or credit union.
So real quick, let me ask you this question, because you were talking about that role going from being an employeepreneur, which, you've got that safety, right? The safety of, right, I've still got the check, but I'm generating additional cash, to, okay, now I'm a full-time entrepreneur, business owner. In having to make that switch so quickly, what are some of the major things that you've learned that over the last few months, like some of the things that maybe didn't seem as important in the business before that now are critical, or things that really demand most of your attention these days, as opposed to when you were doing it on the side?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a phenomenal question, Gerald. And I'll say that, one of the main things I learned very early on was I had to balance, the inner drive within myself. And what I mean by that is, when I was working at the credit union, I would get enamored with all these different requests, right? Because I'm in administration. And so I'm either working projects, or I'm having to sort out disputes, or I'm having to negotiate contracts, and I'm having to kind of coach and develop people. I'm hiring, I'm firing, I'm doing all this stuff. And, sometimes the sales piece, I always kind of, I got to a point where I'm delegating that to other people that I'm hiring to handle that. Well, now when I'm in my own business, I'm having to be everything, right? I'm having to be sales. I've got to be operations. I've got to be engaging. When I attend networking events, I'm representing myself fully, right? I'm not representing, 30% myself and then 70% the bank or credit union. And so I hit that like early on. And one of the things was, man, my voicemail used to fill up because I would have people call me all the time. People try to sell me stuff. People want me to hire them. People want me to look at their resume. And I always made a sense when I was there to do that, because I was always sensitive to people when they're out there and they're struggling and they're looking to get on. And I wanted to give as many people an opportunity as I could. Now that I've got my own business, I'm not enamored with all of that. But now, like when the phone rings, I'm pouncing on it. You know what I mean? Because it could be an opportunity, right? And so my perspective is better with that kind of thing, the connectivity, the efficiency of it than when I was working a job and I had my business and I could kind of, you know what I mean? You could kind of get laissez-faire with, okay, yeah, I get back with them. You know, I'm kind of busy. It's Monday. I'll call them Friday. You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
Now, when I get a call, I mean, right now I'm even answering these telemarketers calls because I don't know, you know, anybody's zip code could be from anywhere.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, that's one of the biggest things I would say is, you know, just the sheer kind of, you know, mentality hustle towards everything being an opportunity. And now I'm attending networking events 100% me. And, you know, one of the things that I learned, too, is to kind of share my story with people as I'm, you know, meeting people, I'm networking, I'm sharing with them that, you know, I've transitioned and now this is what I'm doing now. And, you know, here's how I can add value, you know, to what you're doing. And I learned to be, and I was already like this, but within my own business, I learned, Gerald, to be a giver. You know, look for where I can come in and add value. The easiest thing for me to do, and this is for, you know, big nugget for your audience, the easiest thing to do is to get panicky and to run into things like networking events and start calling people and say, me, I need this, I need that, I need you to buy this, I need you to go to this website, I need you to sign up. And all I do is just me, and just drive that over people's heads, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm scared and I'm fearful and I feel like I'm needing money, right? Because I've been cut off from the job. I didn't get a chance to, you know, ease into it, right? You know, I come in the fourth day of the year, so you know that decision was made in December,
Right?
They ain't make that decision January 4th, right? They waited till the holidays was over, everybody gets back from Christmas, boom, here you go, Ron, you out. You know what I mean? After I've made a bunch of money for the company and hired good people and you know, all these kind of things, train, coach, be a driver of culture, but I was not in the future plans. So, you know, it's difficult in that, but, you know, I found great joy because there's somewhat of a relief on the other side of it that, you know, it's not saying you're not answering to anybody or things like that, but I've got a lot of flexibility. I've been able to read more. I've been able to get rest, much needed rest, Gerald, towards my health. You know, I've lost weight, not from being worried and things like that with the issue, but I've been able to go to the gym. I've been playing ball more again now. And that's helped my frame of mind. And my wife's been ultra supportive in that, which is, you know, very critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And having a support system that, you know, supports your vision, what you're doing, and doesn't allow the fear factor to overcome her, which is easy to do, right? And I don't always blame people because, you know, it's difficult when you get cut off. It's one thing when you work towards it, but you get cut off. You know, some people, some men and some women can't handle that. And, you know, my lady, my queen has been ultra supportive throughout the whole entire process. And matter of fact, she's the one she's kind of stepped up her game and, you know, making herself even available for me to go to some networking things at night and on the weekends and, you know, helping pick up the girls a little bit even more than even before to allow me time to be able to do some of those things that I didn't necessarily always have to do in the past. Because in the past, I could go to a networking event, I could blow it all off or whatever, right? Now, I've got every opportunity. I feel like I've got to be there to pounce on it because I don't want to miss out because I've got to generate it myself.
Right, absolutely. So speaking on all of those things, right, and creating opportunities, generating opportunities for the business, you know, you've got Brooks Brothers Consulting, and I've got my company, Haptic Consulting LLC, and it seems like both of us have kind of gone down this pathway of trying to figure out a unique way to market ourselves out here, right? To market that business. Yeah. And that's basically by starting a podcast. And so, right. You know, let's transition over and kind of have that conversation. What was it that made you decide to start your podcast, when it comes to, marketing your business, and how did you go about that process, and how has that affected your ability to generate those opportunities?
Yeah. Absolutely, no doubt. So I got into I started the podcast last August of 2017, the Mind Your Business podcast. And when I was looking to start it, I had a cousin, if you rewind back several years, back to 2011, we did a radio show of one of those terrestrial radio stations here in Memphis on the AM dial. And we did a show called The Flow of Money. And that was more kind of an economic show where we would talk about some of the things really local to Memphis from an economic and kind of political, governmental standpoint. That went well, but at that time, podcasting was still very new. It was in its infancy stages and didn't have the crossover kind of appeal that radio was still kind of dominating. As you fast forward, as we're going into the last year, one of the things that kind of gave me the itch and kind of triggered was a podcast called The Startup Life. And I was a guest on it a couple times. One when the Jay-Z 444 album came out, we did a 2-part series, and another to talk about my business. And, we just got to talking, and I had an interest, Gerald, in kind of doing, a podcast, but wasn't really sure I was going to make time and what would I talk about and things like that. And as I researched it and kind of looked within myself, talked to a few mentors, I just settled on, hey, it's best to talk about things that I know and that I've got experience with than to try to talk about things I don't really have a passion about or things that are just solely popular and things like that I may not care about. Mm-hmm. And so the show actually started, the first title of the podcast was actually the I Really Mean It podcast. And that came because, as a kind of a hip hop fan, I was a big fan of, kind of Cameron and Dipset and all that stuff up in New York. As funny as that sounds, also being here in Memphis with 3 6 Mafia and all that kind of thing. They had a song called I Really Mean It that I always loved. I always loved the beat. I always loved the voices on the flow of it and all that kind of thing. And I love, kind of how the flow of the beat, drums and all that. So, I used that. I thought of that as the intro, and I thought of that as the show. And so I started the show again in August, and the way I do it is really simple. And I've got a Blue Yeti microphone, a USB microphone. Actually, my first microphone I bought off Amazon for like $25, and it's good. And then after a while, I got the Blue Yeti, which a lot of your audience may have heard of. I bought it on Black Friday. I got it for like $89. It's normally like $120, but it's well worth it. I know there's a lot of different microphones out there, but it's a fairly good one with good quality and that kind of thing. And I got a PC here at the house. I've got an office here in Memphis that I had a PC at, and so I would alternate between the two. I use what's called Spreaker.com, which is SPREAKER.com. For those that want to check that out, that's where I host the podcast as far as the audio. And then they've got within it kind of a built-in web-based software that you can actually record to. And the benefit of that is they have it such that a one-button click will send it out to Apple, iTunes, and Google Play, and SoundCloud, and Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, and YouTube, and all these different places for you. So you don't have to manually do it. It does it on what's called an RSS feed, of course. And so I get started with the podcast in August, and the first couple were rough, man. If you go back and listen to my first couple episodes, I didn't really like the sound of my voice. Hearing it recorded like that, I had to get used to that. I had to get used to kind of the format, not just winging the show, but actually sitting down and kind of coming up with somewhat of a format of what I wanted to do and kind of confining, at least having some structure around my thoughts somewhat, so I'm not just kind of rambling. And so all that took time. So I would encourage people to, you may not like the sound of it and things like that if you're starting the podcast today, but stay with it. And I had to get a consistent schedule, which, now, Gerald, we do every Friday at noon is when I record a new episode. The idea, rationale behind that is the target demographic are business owners, either from the startup phase all the way up to existing business owners. And they tend to be people that their schedules lighten up on Fridays. Either
Mm-hmm.
they're traveling or they're moving that kind of way. And they typically will listen. They're at the gym, they're waiting in an airport, they're driving, either to or from work or, from one city to the next. And so I wanted something that they could get best practices from, that they could incorporate and begin cultivating and thinking about and planning during the weekend, and then hit it hard Monday morning.
Nice.
So Monday morning, so they've had time to absorb it. Versus if I release it Monday morning, your week's already started. So it's already going to take you a couple days to begin absorbing and practicing it. By that point, the week's over with. And so that's where I do it at that particular time, and I incorporate Facebook Live into the recording. That just opens up the audience, and it allows my friends or those close to me to see it and be able to share it and be able to interact with me using that technology. And the only thing I did with that, I've got an old Samsung Note 5 that I had before the phone I've got now, Gerald, and I put that on a $20 tripod. I left it on the network. It was extra $15 a month. And so that's what I use to record the Facebook Live that captures the audio from the podcast, as well as anybody who joins me Facebook Live, that audio and the visual from the video. And so earlier this year, not too long after I got let go from the credit union, I decided to change the name of the podcast from I Really Mean It to the Minding Your Business podcast. The reason or rationale behind the change was as my audience started to pick up, they didn't know really what the hell I really mean it. What did I really mean? Right? So the title of it was ambiguous to some folks, that unless you had to listen to it to know what it was about. And from a marketing standpoint, and just sharing this with your audience, you want your show, you want to have a creative, kind of catchy, if that's the route that you want to go, but you want to be fairly overt in your titling so that before people even listen to your podcast, they can get a sense of what it's about.
Absolutely.
And that's not to be overly predictable, but yeah, it's not to be overly predictable, but before people listen to your podcast, you want them to get a sense of what kind of content you're presenting. And if you do that, that allows people to, kind of jump in and begin listening. The I Really Mean It, podcast, it didn't give that. It wasn't, it's a nice catchy name, but, that's the first thing. And I had, some listeners that, they're like, yeah, I listen to it, but when I tell people about it, they're like, well, what does he mean? What do you mean? What does he mean?
Yeah.
Does he mean some things and not others?
And
where,
it is.
it's
one of those things when you're trying to market anything, right? When you're trying to brand anything,
right.
We sometimes overthink it, right? Try to get a little bit too cute with it, and like for me, at least the way that I titled this show, Buy Black, Build the New Black Wall Street. Not only did I want people to know exactly what it was about so that when they dive in, they will know what they're going to get. But I also wanted people to know before they ever went to download the show whether or not it was for them. If this is not for you, I want you to know before you ever download it. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want you wasting my time, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's another huge thing with branding is that knowing who your target audience is, but also knowing who is not in that audience and helping them to find the door as quickly as possible so that you're not wasting each other's time. So, I commend you. I think that that's a great change. The Minding Your Business podcast is very clearly, it's your business. And so you're talking to business owners and you're teaching them how they can mind their business, how they can turn that into a success. I love it. So speaking of, let's talk about that. You rebranded the podcast right around the time that you actually went full-time business owner. What changes have you seen in your business? What changes have you seen on the outcomes when it comes to how the podcast is impacting your success?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gerald, one of the things that I wasn't smart enough to pick up on this initially, and you kind of alluded to it in your last question, which is the marketing of the podcast. I didn't initially look at it as marketing my business, my consulting business. I looked at it as a platform to me to be able to share and kind of express, my thoughts and my experiences, and hope that those best practices, whether they're entrepreneurship, whether it's in real estate, or taking the trending news topic and not necessarily ranting about them, like kind of the barbershop rant, like you might hear a Stephen A. Smith or someone like that do. I want to take more of, let me take the issues or take the things that arise and help business owners be able to see from that how you can avoid or mitigate whatever's occurred, or how can you duplicate when it's positive, that kind of thing. And I grossly underestimated the marketing piece of it. I was thinking of it as informative. So what happened was, as I was doing the podcast and putting it out there, and the first time I'm doing the podcast, no one downloads it. So I'm like, oh man, here we go. I do the second podcast, one or two people start downloading it, that kind of thing. So I'm not seeing the numbers. And this is one thing that's tough for all of us. It's tough for people because you want to see the numbers you're rolling. We're a society now that's driven off of likes and comments and shares, right? And so I wasn't seeing that initially. And most podcasts, unless you're Kevin Hart and you got this big name and following, and or someone like that, you're not going to more than likely get that kind of engagement right off the bat.
Right.
And so what I did, I just stuck with it, and I recorded the podcast with the mindset that even if it's just one person listening, if I could just reach that one person and share with them a best practice that helps them avoid a pitfall, I've already won. So I didn't get into seduced in watching my numbers in a sense. Now I watch them a little bit more now as I've gotten more of it and it's kind of come along, but I tried to train my mind initially, to not just sit and kind of hawk the analytics of it, but focus more on the content and what am I saying, and focus on my voice and all those kind of things. And so I've been able to improve, listening to other podcasts, taking a few online training classes around it and that kind of thing. With my consulting business, from a marketing standpoint, by showcasing expertise on the podcast, I began getting emails and phone calls, Gerald, about people telling me about what they liked, or in some cases even didn't like about a topic or a show or something that wasn't touched on, and reaching out to me about me consulting with them about their business in a one-on-one sense, which is something I've got a passion about and love to do. And so the podcast has continued to be that for me. And so when people have shared with me that they want to start a podcast and they want to do it, I always ask them why. And one thing I want to make sure they understand is that, the podcast can be a gross marketing tool for you to be able to overtly get your message out and unequivocally showcase your talent and your ability to share information, and maybe even bring information from other people you might have on your show. And by doing that for me, even since I've transitioned and now full time, I've found where, I've had spikes in business. I mean, right now, obviously my business is, close to 100%. Of course, part of that because I'm in it full time, all that kind of thing. But the podcast has been a big platform for bringing people to me. And, in my role, like, in consulting, it's a lot of reaching out to people, a lot of face-to-face meetings and kind of going around town and within areas. The podcast is kind of the classroom where I'm bringing people to me. And, as long as I feel like I can deliver the content that, people can find benefit in and find value in, then I'm doing my job, Gerald. And, same just like yourself, it's about, kind of building it and, again, giving that quality content that people are looking for these days.
Yeah. And I love the podcast platform. For anybody out in the audience who's listening, if you're out there and you have either started a business, or you're thinking about starting a business, or you feel like you have opinions on subjects, whether they be about business or pop culture or nerd culture or whatever it is, and you're not hearing anybody out there in the marketplace who is kind of sharing your take on whatever that information is, I feel like a podcast is one of the best things that you can do to launch yourself, because when you look at the ways that people gain expertise out in the marketplace, right? You see people on TV, you see people on YouTube, you hear people on quote unquote real radio or things like that. And all of those platforms, they cost a lot of money to get yourself onto those platforms. And then the level of production that you have to do in order to get people to bring attention to it. I mean, just think about YouTube, right? YouTube videos, you've got to get it. It's got to be less than 2 minutes long. It's got to have visual pop. You've got to have personality, because you're asking somebody to sit there for more than 2 minutes and visually look at something you're doing and listen to you at the same time, which means they can't do anything else, which means you got to be great, right? Otherwise, people won't watch or listen to your stuff. But with a podcast, it doesn't cost very much to set up. Like you were saying, Ron, you got your first mic for $25. Hosting services on Spreaker is probably, less than $20 a month. And really all you got to do is have a microphone, a computer, and a voice. And you can create content that is 20, 30, 40 minutes, an hour long, and put it out there to the world consistently without the requirement of people, what's that word that I'm looking for? Ingesting it. Without doing anything else. I can do 15 other things while I'm listening to your content and appreciate it and get to know, like, and trust you. And that builds expertise, right? Whatever your market is, you can build expertise through a podcast. So I definitely get what you were saying about, not seeing the marketing value of it. Now, for me, with Buy Black Podcast, I immediately knew that this was going to be a marketing platform, but my regret is that I felt at the very beginning that if I didn't make it clear that I'm building this for the community and not for me, that people wouldn't listen, right? So I actually spent the first 8 months not promoting myself on this podcast at all. Not talking about my business, not talking about my consulting, not talking about anything, just the other business owners, because I didn't want it to seem like a selfish thing. But I knew that my long-term goal was to become the expert, to become kind of the facilitator that people come to and come through to connect with each other. But I thought I needed to wait to put myself out there. So now here I am 8 months, 9 months in, and I'm finally doing what you do with your show, right? You start off the Minding Your Business podcast and you talk about Brooks Brothers Consulting. I'm just now starting to do that with Haptic. And I wish that I had understood earlier on that people won't decide they don't want to listen to your podcast just because you tell them about yourself. They want to hear about you. They want to hear from you. So that's something that I definitely learned about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a great point because, and I found this even with my Facebook Live audience, because I when doing that simultaneous with the podcast, Gerald, that's helped with the podcast numbers because they'll go visit the site and they'll share it and do all those sort of things. But, I always kind of balance out, I've never really branded my businesses off of me in the past. And so, Brooks Brothers Consulting was kind of my first where I had my name, within it. And I'm playing off, of course, the Brooks Brothers brand, which, I did have to check. I actually got a call from someone at Brooks Brothers thinking that I was a part of Brooks Brothers, the clothing company, which was an interesting conversation in itself. And it's actually helped with SEO because people searching Brooks Brothers are catching Brooks Brothers Consulting, which is great. So without a doubt there. But, I found that, for marketing and kind of branding it somewhat off myself, one of the things I always want to make sure that I don't do is make it so much about me that the content gets missed out. And that's where I don't want to go overboard with it, where I overexpose myself. And today's, when I'm giving best practices, I felt the need to brand it off of me because they needed to know the man behind the information. If I become just kind of like a ghostly figure, or kind of a mythical figure in that sense, it's possible that I may not gain the full credibility, or they start liking me solely for entertainment value and things like that. So
Got it.
I want to make sure that they got enough of me to gain an understanding of who I am, and possibly even gain an empathy, towards, things that I present with the content, so that there's a person behind the content. And one of the things going forward as kind of a long-term prognosis for my particular podcast is to continue to expand and get to a point, which I've done a little bit, some so far, is actually the mobile piece of podcasting, to be able to actually go and be at a business owner's place of business real time and talk about their joys and talk about their pains, and have a customer be able to come on and things like that. And I've been able to do that a little bit so far with the podcast. I've broadcast just from my cell phone and, like you said, the microphone, and being able to sit right there with Facebook Live and actually have a customer come up and join the show right there. Completely unscripted, and that kind of thing. That was really great content, because this customer was able to talk about on the fly what they thought about that business, what they thought about the business owner, their relationship with the business owner, their thought on business in general, and it turned out to be great content. And so one of the things that you touched on earlier, which I think is a big point that your audience should get, is with radio and terrestrial radio, you might be on from 4 to 5 o'clock. And if I'm not listening to the radio at that time, I don't hear your show, right? With a podcast, because of the replayability of episodes, I can go back to your podcast, Gerald, and listen to the very first episode, 50 years from now, if you still have it up. Right. So that value can still get there and still be replayed and shaped and things like that. And it's not, you and I are not controlled, and podcast owners are not controlled by, some producer that comes in and says, you can say this, you can't say that, you got to say it in this light, you got to stop here, you got to start there, you got to have this guest, you got to ask them this question. And, we don't have that, right? We're completely the owners and the leaders of our shows.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I share, like you said, you have your podcast and you have your opinion. It's totally yours. You can talk about whatever you want. You're not bound even by the FCC or any of that kind of stuff because you're online. And it provides you that great, again, authentic platform that you can control. You do as much or as little of it as you choose. You could be on the platforms that you want. And being on those platforms are mostly free, to get in SoundCloud, to get into iTunes, in the Google Play, iHeartRadio. There's really not an expense for that. And so the startup cost for a podcast is just unbelievably low. And a lot of the equipment your audience already has. Most people already have some level of PC or tablet or laptop, probably multiples of them. A microphone you may have, but more likely you may not have that. You may purchase that, to get the hosting and things like that. All very inexpensive. And I'm with you, Gerald. I encourage anybody out there that's listening to this podcast, near or far, if you're looking at a way to promote your business in a very streamlined kind of way and impactful way, the podcast is the way to do it. And all stats show from people who study this industry, it's going to continue to grow because people are consuming audio content. Because of what you said, Gerald, people, when you watch the video, it kind of hones you in even. And that's one of the challenges for those that invest in YouTube, that YouTube, it has some of the same issues that Facebook, not so much what Facebook's doing right now in the media, but when you talk about video content and the need to keep it short, and people generally haven't figured out, just the audio piece of video yet. But the podcast has already figured that out, that people will consume audio, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That made $1 billion because of a headphone. People want audio, they want content, And, for your audience, Gerald, everybody's got a voice and everybody's got some level of talent. And, you all can be great podcast hosts within your own right that I think just continues to grow the industry and becomes a benefit to all of us to have that voice. Because everybody can't be on the radio, everybody's not going to be on TV, and in some cases, you may not want to, given some of what those industries experience. So it's a phenomenal thing with podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate that, man. I appreciate the knowledge and kind of the guidance on how you can get started, because it is, anybody listening, it's that easy. It doesn't take much at all to get started in this. One of the more important things I think with starting a podcast is don't go it alone. And regardless of what your demographics are, there are podcast groups out there on social media all over the place, right? But specifically, if you're Black out here in the audience, you think you want to start a podcast, doesn't matter what topic you're going to go on, doesn't matter what industry you're in, there are a few really good, Black podcast groups out there where you can go in, you can get support, you can connect with people, you can get featured on their show, they can feature on your show, they teach you things about how to get started. There's one thing about this particular type of community in the podcast world. I think this is probably the most inclusive and positive community of Black people that I have been around ever. And it's very interesting that podcasting draws people who have different opinions, different lifestyles, different political views, all to one spot with one goal of creating the best content with the best audio quality out there and helping each other. So if you do decide to get into podcasting, trust me, it's not something you have to go out alone. There are plenty of folks who will kind of help you walk down that path to creating a great show.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And you and I are members of those groups. And matter of fact, you and I came into contact and communication through those groups. And so it just, gives the power of what you're saying in terms of that kind of community. And Gerald, I'd echo the same sentiments that in terms of the positivity, in terms of the engagement, the way the admins manage the group, I think is phenomenal. Kind of keeps it really, it's really tightly managed to ensure the quality, not so much just to be dogmatic, but to ensure that you have a strong community where everybody has a voice within it and can add value. And I've gotten a ton of nuggets from it. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, man, let's turn the corner here. I want to get to some of these final questions I have for you. The very first one, it may be, you may have already spoken about it, but this may be something a little bit different. I'm just going to go ahead and ask, what is the biggest challenge that you have come up against, and how have you overcome it?
The biggest challenge is the fear factor with whether it's, and on a couple fronts. One, the fear factor with the podcast of how does it compare to other podcasts? When I hear podcasts and some of the ones I listen to, and it seems like they've got this great audio and they've got this great script, and they follow it to the T, and there's great editing and things like that. And I had an initial fear that when I listened to some of my early episodes, like, man, am I really going to be good at this? I know the topics and things like that, but I don't really do editing with my podcast. I record it live, the whole thing. I record it from Facebook Live to recording it live. And so, I was like, well, man, maybe I need to jump into the editing piece. And, maybe I need to get this, and maybe I need to get that. And, it's just the overall fear factor within yourself that you're always going to fight. And I think, your audience can relate to that is, I battled that. And to overcome that, one, you have to have the will to kind of keep forward with it, understanding that you continue to work at it to get better. You reach out to people that you know and kind of respect that are doing podcasts already and can kind of give you authentic nuggets. continue to listen to podcasts, listen for certain things and kind of opportunities, and just really just keep at it and try to keep your confidence up. Read about podcasts, read about the industries, things like that, and they really help you as you continue to go forward. In the business, a lot of the same thing. It's the fear factor of Gerald. There's always that little person that's on your shoulder that says, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe, Ron, maybe you should just go back to work. You don't want to. What happens if you run out of money and your wife starts fussing at you, and the kids can't go to soccer practice anymore, and you got to do this, you got to do that. How are you going to feel about that? Then you got the other little man or little woman, whichever one that's telling you, hey man, you could do this. You're great. You've got a great process. Keep working at it. It's going to pull through. And those are always at odds, even when you're successful. So even when you got a bank account full of money and everybody's happy and you can go on vacation and you can kind of let your hair down a little bit, you're always going to have that battle. And I have that. The way I conquer that is I work towards it every day. I put out content in terms of just visual content on Instagram and on Facebook. And a lot of that I do for other people, but I started with myself, Gerald. So I may make a graphic, and I just use like canva.com, right? And pull, get a graphic from there. They'll have a lot of free approved graphics, and then some that you buy, and you can get some free ones if you're a nonprofit. But, I do that. I put out content and things like that to help motivate myself along with motivating my network. And so by doing that, engaging in those groups like we just talked about, you've got to get yourself around positive people and positive content. And for a lot of people in various audiences, that's difficult. It's difficult to get yourself outside of the circle that you're always around. But I would encourage you got to find people that are doing what it is that you're doing and want to be. And you've got to center around that. You've got to get yourself around that type of content. Nothing wrong with entertainment stuff, TV shows and sports events and all that kind of thing. But try to consume, positive content. Read things about positivity, not to be naive, but to engage yourself and engage your spirit, because you typically you become what you consume. And so I learned that early on. And so, I'm reading things. I've got things that come to my inbox that are positive phrases, positive quotes. When I go on YouTube, I'm not just watching, fight videos and, watching the news about who got killed and, who got hurt with this and who's, all that kind of stuff. I try to listen to the positive stuff, not to stay out the loop of what's really happening in the world, but to surround myself with the positive mindset and the positive thinking that it takes to be successful. And your successful people, kind of around the world, they typically could look to consume that positive kind of content.
Right. I appreciate that, man. That's some good, excellent advice right there. So what do you have coming up next? Whether it be with Brooks Brothers, whether it be with the Mind Your Business podcast, what have you got coming up, and what can our audience help you out with?
Yeah, so with Brooks Brothers Consulting, just to start there, what I do is leadership talent development for executives, directors, and managers. And so I'm working with fairly small to mid-sized companies, usually about anywhere from 10 to maybe about 500 employees. And I work with, those managers. Typically they're new to the company, or they may not be new, but to the company, and they've been promoted within the company. So someone that's newly promoted to a leadership position. I come in with a kind of a streamlined program where I kind of serve as their coach mentor, and I help them develop the kind of critical skills that it takes for them to be successful in their career and then drive the value within their leadership position to be successful. And so that's something that I'm continuing to kind of press forward with. So if anybody in your audience, it doesn't matter where the company is geographically, But if you happen to yourself be a new manager and you've got a company that is willing to support your development, I'm someone that can come and then add value to that through my experience and again, through some various programs that I have, some within your company and some outside, again, with the idea is to help you be successful. And so if you have that, or you have family members that are new in management or new to a company in leadership, definitely reach out. It's brooksbrothersconsulting.com. All the contact information is there. Another real quick thing, Gerald, is we also do lending. And so I've got relationships from my banking days with 4,000 lenders around the country that do personal loans, anything from roughly $2,000 to about $50,000, and then business loans. And so I'm able to help startup and existing business owners with the type of financing. I'm not a debt guy, so I'm not a guy that looks to just give you a loan just to add debt to your business, but how you can leverage private lending money, which is more streamlined, a little less expensive than getting it from a bank or credit union, how you can leverage that to purchase assets to drive your business. So whether it's equipment leasing, financing, working capital, if you're looking to purchase rental property, which is a big thing right now, I've been enamored with those requests that we're doing and getting done. And rental property purchases, refinances, those kind of things. Factoring, if you're looking at that, invoice, financing, inventory, which is a big thing. If you've got a location and you're needing furnishings, you're needing dinner hoods for your restaurant, you're needing tables and chairs, you're needing refrigerator, coolers, stoves, all those kind of things. Essentially, if it's within your business or personally, you're looking to consolidate debt, any of those kind of things, Gerald, we're doing. I've got web links for that you can get through brooksbrothersconsulting.com to apply with no hard credit pool. So essentially, you could go through our site and get an approval with just a soft pull to your credit. And then, the hard pull is done once you decide to pursue it and go with an approval from a lender. But these lenders, again, are around the country. And so definitely get with me again. That's brooksbrothersconsulting.com. With the podcast, the Mind Your Business podcast, I want to continue to get out there, get in front of business owners, anywhere that you are, get your story told. But then also I want to be able to share with you content around the best practices. I want to continue that, continue to grow that show. And so, I'm really looking at this year how I can use these kind of platforms, Gerald, to add value to someone else's life. And I feel like my life will be enriched from, again, authentically who I'm able to help. And so I'm on the prowl to create champions. That's really what it is.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that, man. We appreciate you sharing that with us. Real quick, before we get out of here with that last question of the day, tell us what are all those places where we can find you? Where can we find the podcast? Where can we find Brooks Brothers? How can we get in touch with you, be it email, social media? Just hit us with all of those contacts.
Yeah, definitely. So the Mind Your Business podcast you can find it on Apple, iTunes. You can find it on Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker, pretty much anywhere that you find and consume podcast content, YouTube, and those kind of places. And then we do have a website, which is the THEMYB, so Mary Yellow Brown podcast.com. So the MYBpodcast.com is where you can find more information about the podcast. You can listen to all episodes, and then you can connect with us on social media. Myself, Ron Brooks. I'm at Champ Ron on Twitter and on Instagram. You can also catch me on LinkedIn as well. And on Facebook for Brooks Brothers Consulting, Brooks Brothers Consulting on Facebook. You can connect there. The Mind Your Business podcast has a Facebook page as well. And so, we're all over there. I love to hear from you. Love for you that support this podcast. This is a phenomenal podcast. And again, I'm elated for the opportunity to be a guest here tonight. But continue to support this podcast, support the Mind Your Business podcast, support podcasts that are providing good content. Look to get into it yourself if you're so inclined. And, you can email Ron at brooksbrothersconsulting.com. That's Ron at brooksbrothersconsulting.com. We'd love to hear from you there. Definitely will respond. And again, if I can be a value add to your team, so I like to, champion myself to be a very extremely low cost, value added partner to anybody there in your audience.
Love it. That's awesome, man. Well, that brings us to our final question of the day, the always famous last question of being on the Buy Black podcast. What is your number one piece of advice for the community as a whole?
The number one advice is to be intentional, and be intentional with what you're wanting, and be intentional about how you can help others. So often, Gerald, this is a very individualistic society we have in America, where we celebrate the individual very high. We celebrate not the Chicago Bulls, we celebrate Michael Jordan. We celebrate not Harpo Productions, we celebrate Oprah Winfrey. Everything's about the individual. And it's easy to get sucked into that. And what I would encourage people is to be intentional, let people know what it is that you want. And don't be ashamed of that. Don't be ashamed of your pricing. Don't be ashamed of your business. Don't be ashamed that you're not where you want to be yet. Don't be ashamed about yesterday's mistakes. Don't be ashamed about things that have happened in the past. And all those are done. Those are checks that have already been cashed, right? And however they were cashed and all that, you've got a great opportunity to be able to move forward. And so be intentional and look to add value to someone else. And if you do that, you'll be just uber successful, and you'll find that the energy brings positivity to you when you seek first to add that value, and then be intentional about having that value added back to you in a bi-directional kind of sense. So.
Excellent. Those wonderful words of wisdom, man. I appreciate you sharing everything you share with us today. So, hey, y'all heard it, Buy Black Podcast community. This was episode 36 with Ron Brooks of the Minding Your Business podcast and Brooks Brothers Consulting in the books. So we're out of here, y'all, and we will catch you in the next episode. Thanks for coming out, Ron.
All right. Thank you so much, Gerald. And thank you so much to Buy Black podcast listeners and Buy Black podcast nation. It's phenomenal community that you got there, Gerald, and thank you again so much.
All right, guys, that is it. Episode 36 in the books with Ron Brooks. Before we get out of here today, I just want to give you a quick reminder of where you can find all of Ron's content, as well as his consulting firm and other projects that he's working on. So you can find the Minding Your Business podcast on pretty much any podcast directory out there. You can find it directly at the website at themybpodcast.com, themybpodcast.com. You can also find Ron's consulting firm at brooksbrothersconsulting.com. And here's another component of Ron's delivery and services out in the community. If you are in the Memphis area in Tennessee, he also has another organization. It's a 501c3 called the R.G. Brooks Development Consortium. And so if you look at what Ron has going on in his community, he's got the podcast. He's giving great business advice every single week. He's got his consulting firm, which is the profit end of his organization. And then he's also got the Development Consortium. And so he's hitting all facets of trying to spread good information out into the world, as well as run a business to take care of his family and create an organization that is out there and helping develop the youth in the community as well. So if you are in that area, if you were in the Memphis, Tennessee area, definitely check out Brooks Brothers Consulting. Check out the R.G. Brooks Development Consortium. And no matter where you are, definitely look for the Minding Your Business podcast to get that great information that Ron is giving out each week. The final thing I have for you before we get out of here today, for the Buy Black podcast itself, I am now at a point where I'm going to start offering advertising slots for this show. So if you are out there and you have a business that you would like to promote on the Buy Black podcast, I want you to reach out to me at gerald at buyblackpodcast.com. At this point, I'm going to be offering 2 different types of advertising. One is going to be a 30-second spot before the show begins, very similar to the introduction about haptic consulting that we've added to the show. And then the other is going to be a 60-second spot, which is going to run midway through the show. And that's going to be available as well. So if you have a business, if you would like to advertise your business here on Buy Black Podcast, reach out to me so we can talk about pricing and availability. Other than that, I really appreciate you guys continuing to be with me as we grow this thing every week. We're hitting new milestones. We're growing when it comes to listenership, and you guys are doing a great job with the reviews and with talking to your people out there and sending them my way. Continuing to get the phone calls, continuing to get the emails, and I'm continuing to connect with more great people, more great interviews coming to you in the future. Let's keep it rolling in 2018. All right. Thanks for being out there. Thanks for staying with me. I will catch you in the next episode.